Very good force.
You record yourself?
Well, right now at least I have three students absent, and one of them may or may not show up, and I guess Jess is normally here every other week, so I thought the easiest way to do it would be to have a recording, and then they could put it on YouTube, and y'all can go back and watch it.
That's good.
All right,
So I see you before class. Go ahead.
What was that?
So I see you before class after this. Since you said that on YouTube. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll turn it off.
I'm
I'm turning it off if we have any private conversation. Okay, so for this class, all right, no, let's get back. All right, I'm Shane Clack. I grew up in Great Falls. I grew up going to this church. I attended the College of Charleston when I was just barely 18, and I majored in classical studies, which is essentially Roman civilization, Greek civilization, and literature and stuff like that. So that's where I studied Greek, and about half the reason I wanted to study Greek was because I wanted to be able to read the New Testament in Greek. The New Testament is fairly easy Greek compared to Greek, and we'll get into all that in a minute. But I know each of y'all, by name at least, is all y'all, you're already a minister. You're all ministers.
Well, the three of us in the room right now.
Okay. I didn't know where everyone stayed, because some people go to seminary just because they want to learn a little bit more, and some people go because they need a, you can go for seminary for another reason. But each of y'all has a church that y'all pastor.
No, we don't pastor.
Okay.
Yeah, Ron and myself.
Right, I knew y'all too.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right, so by minister,
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, Jason did.
oh, he's pastoring the church? Or he wants to
I
pastor?
think he said he got related, he got something on over the last class, didn't he?
Yeah, I thought it was youth pastor. A youth pastor.
Okay. Anyway, y'all are here because y'all want to be in the ministry.
Absolutely.
Right? In some respect. Either you already are, or you're going to be, and I guess, if you want to look at it theologically, then from the moment of your baptism and accepting Christ, you're in the ministry in some capacity. Different gifts for different folks. But so, Greek. I want to talk with you real fast about why I think Greek is important for y'all. Because I think it really is, honestly, and here's why. You got different stripes of folks in the church, right? Not everyone's the same. And some people are like me. All right, I'm very analytical. And I tend to be skeptical at times of things. Skeptical of stuff outside of religion and stuff inside of religion, stuff outside of Christianity, stuff inside of Christianity. And when it comes to living a life of faith, that can be a stumbling block. Understandable, right? And the thing about being skeptical, and I'm going to pull the chalkboard in a minute because I like chalkboards, but real fast, our word skeptical, this is a map. We're going to talk about the map in just a second. Our word skeptical, skeptical comes from the Greek word skepto, which means to examine. Though it's not inherently a bad thing, all right? It just means that you're kind of examining the world around you. But it can be, when, say, you're in high school and you start learning about evolution, and then you go to church on Sunday after you've been to school all week, and you're back in this environment where everybody around you, or depending on what church you go to, but, a Baptist church in the South, most people don't believe in evolution. Most people think that creationism is the word of the day, the order of the day for Christians, and Christians ought to believe in a creationist world. So, that's one issue where you probably, if you're going to be over at church, you're going to run into some kids who's going through this kind of stuff, right? And in my view, you can't just push it aside. You can't just say, well, that's not true, or well, we don't believe that, because a skeptical person, by nature, is going to question you saying that. And I'm going to go over something real fast that was a recent stumbling block for me. And it's in the Bible. And just real fast, you are supposed to have a Greek New Testament for this class, and you are supposed to bring your preferred copy of, your preferred translation of Scripture. I would like it to be either KJV, NKJV, RSV, or ESV. I'd like it to be one of those. And I got one here if anyone needs one today.
Like you said, I would prefer it.
Of among those.
That's how I use those.
You have any of those?
No, I got the NLT, that's what I use.
New Living Translations?
But I can get one of those.
Well, and we got
And I got
some,
the King
we
James.
got some on the table right
I got
here too.
King James.
And I got ESV right there. But the reason why I've got these up here is because your New Living Translation, your Amplified Version, your NIV, they go for kind of a sense translation of the text, and they don't always stick very close to the grammar of things. But with these
I like
texts,
I like it.
you like it?
Yes.
Well, and I think it has its place. But I don't think it has its place in the introductory language classroom. Because we're going to go line by line for these things. And going line by line, it helps when you have a translation that sticks pretty close to the literal text and doesn't extrapolate too much. Anyway,
So you tell me I can't use this anymore?
I just rather you not use it for this class.
Because I'm gonna use it Sunday, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Go ahead, man, I'm just messing with you, go ahead.
All right. So real fast, if you would turn in, you can use that for this if you want to. If you would turn to Galatians 1:17. And you know what? Let's go ahead and usher in the chalkboard because I like the chalkboard.
What chapter?
1:17.
Okay.
Sounds like the music's not going to. Okay. Galatians 1:17. All right. Someone read it.
See it. Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went to Arabia and returned again to Damascus.
Does anyone know the context of that verse? What Paul's talking about? Are you familiar with?
Go ahead.
Okay. So the Galatians were going through this little crisis of faith, you know. And Paul starts off his letter talking about his conversion experience, right? And his goal there is to show that the gospel he received isn't from man. He received it directly from Christ. So he talks about his encounter with Christ, and then he talks about what he did immediately afterwards. And I believe his intent with this verse is to say, hey, when I was converted, I didn't go back immediately to Jerusalem and make sure I was doing everything according to the checkbox. I didn't go immediately back to Jerusalem and get a list of rules about how to be Jewish and Christian. I went to Arabia. All right? And read it one more time for me, Carla.
Okay. Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went to Arabia and returned again to Damascus.
Okay. I went to Arabia in Greek, and you can look it up now because you have a Greek New Testament if you'd like. Okay. In Greek, that I went to Arabia is apelthon eis Arabian. Okay. I went out to Arabia. Okay.
Say it again.
Apelthon eis Arabian. We're going to go over the alphabet in just a minute. This is just the teaser. This is me. I want to impress on you why I think you really ought to keep learning Greek after this class. Okay. All right. So, according to Paul, he was converted and he went away immediately to Arabia.
Mhm.
Someone please turn to Acts 9:19. Now, if you wanted, just off the top of your head, to get an account of Paul's conversion, you probably would go directly to Acts, right? Because Acts is about everything that happened in the church after Jesus went up to heaven. All right, and this is
9:19.
9:19. Yep.
After eating some food, he got his strength back.
Acts 9:19. Is that right?
Am I reading something wrong? Amen.
Yeah, but you didn't finish 19?
Oh, yeah, I finished. So,
Yeah.
yeah, something else is doing it. Saul spent several days with the believers in Damascus.
There we go.
Except to
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Okay. All right. So we got Galatians 1:17 saying he went away to Arabia after his conversion. We got Acts 9:19. What was that last sentence recorded?
Saul spent several days with the believers in Damascus.
He spent several days with the believers in Damascus, and he said several. What version you got there?
It's been some days.
Some days, okay. And the Greek is hemeros tenas. And you can translate that some days or certain days, certain number of days. You could go off a couple different ways. I started off talking about skeptics. All right, and skeptics can latch onto a bunch of different things. One thing that a person that's going to bother a skeptic person is when you find two different ideas in the Bible that don't seem to jive together. You find a verse in one passage, in one book, and then you go back and you read about the same. You start off in Kings and you go to Chronicles, or you start off in Galatians and you go to Acts, or you start off in Mark and you go to Luke, and you see something different happening. And at first you think, well, how are these two ideas compatible? Did somebody get something wrong? And if somebody got something wrong, how do I know this is the Word of God? So, I'm going to let y'all puzzle. Oh, hang on. There's another word in there. I think. Okay, read verse 20.
And straightway he preached Christ into the synagogues, and he is the Son of God. And he is the Son of God.
All right, that's another important word. Straightway.
Straightway.
What does your version have?
Immediately.
Immediately.
Those two.
Immediately. Theos. All right. So I'm going to ask you. You read this and you say, okay, Paul converted and he went to Arabia. He didn't go to Arabia in a sports car or in an airplane. Probably took him a daggone month to get to Arabia. And if he went there, he probably stayed a week and then come back for 2 months. So how is he going to Arabia and yet straightway preaching the gospel in Damascus? How's Paul going to Arabia right after he gets converted and yet at the same time hang around Damascus for tenas hemeros, some days, and immediately preaching in the synagogue?
Yeah.
I'll let y'all puzzle over this. All right, so we start off with this is the Word of God. We believe this is the Word of God, right?
Right.
All right, and we got someone coming to you asking, okay, if this is the Word of God and God's all truth, well, why we got these two different ideas going on here? How do you reconcile them? And I've given you some key words here. I'll let you take a guess of where you think I found my answer. Because I found an answer that satisfied me. This is something I read and sort of puzzled over 6 months ago. And so I went back to the Greek and I read it in Greek. And I didn't pull out a study Bible. I just read it in Greek. And after you've read Greek enough, it doesn't make you perfect at Greek. Doesn't mean you know every single word perfectly or know every aspect of the word. But you get a flavor for the language. And that's what this class to get, is a flavor for the language. So, among those words on that board, I found an idea that resolved it for me. You can take a guess as to which one.
I'm trying to look to see here.
We've got went away, I went away to Arabia. And we've got, he was in Damascus, Hemeras Tinas, which is some days, or a certain number of days. And then we also got immediately he began to preach in the synagogues. Y'all just take a stab. You see the problem though, right? That's the main thing I want to get at here. We got two different accounts, which, you know, imagine you're this kid who's a little precocious, maybe reads the Bible a little more than everyone else, but he's a skeptic too. He's the one who comes to you after Sunday with all the questions and stuff. And he says, "Hey, preacher, I found this. What's your answer?" All right. I would at least want you to appreciate that he's having a legitimately hard time. All right. My answer came from this word right here. Ace. Y'all repeat it with me. Ace.
Ace.
Ace. We're gonna do a lot of reading. All right. Ace. Here's your first lesson about languages. How much experience do any of y'all have learning other languages, French or Spanish or Arabic?
Zero.
No.
Okay.
Zero.
Well, here's your first lesson. Here's your first lesson. Is when you go from one language, and this is why, Recorda, I like to go with my more literal translations. Because in language, because there is no literal. There is no real literal. So I want as literal as I can get, so I know that I'm being close. There is no one-to-one. There is no one-to-one in language translation. Alright. You could take a word, like the Greek word.
Wait a minute, back up. What do you mean go one-to-one? What are you talking about there?
Well, that's what I'm.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can take a word like the Greek word pater. Any guess as to what pater means?
Pater.
Pater. Father.
Oh,
Paternal.
I was thinking.
But yeah, go with your gut. Go with your gut.
I was thinking Potter.
All right. Pater means father. All right.
Father.
But you can't draw an equal sign there. Because when you say it means father, you're really oversimplifying things. Because when you go to Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, and I don't know the verse off the top of my head, I think it's around chapter 9, and you read the phrase pateris moseos, that if you always translated pater as father, then you would translate the plural form as fathers, right? So when it says the fathers of Moses hid him in a basket because they saw that he was pleased, it doesn't work. So what you see in a translation, you see parents. All right? Which means that the plural of pater in Greek can also be parents. But that means that there's no one-to-one. Every time you see the word pater, it can't just mean father. There's a lot of overlap with languages, right? You're going to have a word for apple in one language and a word for apple in another language. But that doesn't mean that word can't be used in different contexts sometimes. Apple of my eye might not be translatable into another language. All right, ace. That means, that stands for the English word to, into, towards, in the direction of, and if my handwriting is sloppy, I'm really sorry, y'all. 4 different ways you could legitimately translate that. And then there's others too. You could translate it as 4, depending on the context. So here's my idea. All right, Paul. He just had his world shaken, right? All right, he's been a Jew all his life, and suddenly he's convicted that this guy that he thought was a liar and apostate is now the Son of God. And he goes, apelthon eis Arabia. He goes out to Arabia. All right? And here's the image that I got in my head whenever I read this word eis, because I know eis doesn't just mean to. It doesn't just mean like I go from here to there. It also means towards. It means in the direction of. And I'm sure that you guys have probably in your days had those moments of frustration where you just need to go take a drive, or you just need to go take a walk, or you need to go think things over. And I know I've gone for a drive and just kind of gone down the highway, and just gone down the highway for like an hour and a half. And I'm just kind of driving, making turns and stuff, exploring places, clearing my head. Or you go for a run and you take some different turns down your neighborhood and go to new places and stuff. I got this idea that Paul was reeling after his conversion. Sort of like, I don't even know what to believe anymore. I don't know what to do. This doesn't make sense to me. And so he gets his eyesight restored to him by Ananias, and he has a meal. And then one day he's just sort of sitting around and he's like, Ananias, I'm going to go for a walk. And he just starts walking. And he's not even seeing the world around him. And he's just sort of puzzled and thinking and stuff. It's like, well, am I supposed to follow Jesus? Or am I supposed to, is this challenging my faith? Or am I supposed to remain this hardline Jew? Maybe this is a false angel. And he's just, blacking out the world around him. And suddenly, the end of the day comes and he says, okay, I'm a Christian. And he looks up and he sees this road sign, and it's like, you imagine one of our road signs that says like, straight goes to Charlotte, and then, left goes to Florence, and he sees the sign and it says Arabia, and it's got an arrow. Doesn't mean he made it to Arabia. Doesn't mean he got to Arabia. He walked towards Arabia. He went out in the direction of Arabia. So it'd be like saying, like, after this conversion experience, I just walked out towards Charlotte. I didn't even know where I was going. And I came to my senses. I went back to Damascus. I stayed in Damascus, Hemeras Tinas. I stayed in Damascus some days. And then with this word, you don't have to arrive. You could just go in the direction of. So, all right. So, which is the downfall of a literal translation. Sometimes the Amplified Version might help in this respect, because maybe it gives you a broader understanding of all the possibilities that a word could be. But just remember, there's no one-to-one. There's no one-to-one. So when you get a question like that, and you know a little bit of Greek, or at least you know a little bit of Greek to know that as an English speaker, we don't have the full picture of the Word of God. I mean, we have it in translation. I believe God preserves the sense of the words. But just the sheer fact that we have so many different translations makes you kind of wonder, like, how much of the actual Word of God is still, which is why I think it's important to learn Greek. All right. So, y'all can puzzle over that. I hope you do puzzle over it. I gotta do this map. Talk to you about this map, because I need you to know what we're talking about. Talking about Greek. And you've heard it said a person is a person is a person is a person. And a book is a book is a book is a book. Well, Greek is not Greek is not Greek is not Greek. Greek is not Greek is not Greek is not Greek, because the Greek peoples started coming into the Mediterranean area around 1600 BC. Let's see. And there is still a country called Greece today. AD. Now, don't you think that language has changed a lot in that time period? It's changed a lot. English has changed in my own lifetime with texting and stuff like that. The word selfie didn't exist 10 years ago. It is a word now we use all the time. All right, so this is supposed to be a map of the Mediterranean. Here's Africa down here. Here's Europe up here. All right, anyone know what this country is going to be? Looks like a boot. Looks like a boot kicking Sicily. If this is France and this is Spain, then this is going to be Italy. Okay. Anyone know where Greece is going to be up here? No. All right. Well, this is modern Greece right here. Anyone know what this country is? Large population of Muslims, but it's a secular democracy. Been in the news a lot because they don't like the Kurds.
Iraq.
Nope.
Iraq.
All right. Turkey. Turkey. This is modern Turkey right here. Okay. Now, modern countries with definite lines and borders and boundaries is really a 20th century invention. Like World War I happened and we carved out the Middle East into, well, I say we, it was mostly England and France. They carved out the Middle East into a bunch of countries that didn't exist before. Iraq and Saudi Arabia. They didn't really exist before the 20th century. All right. And Turkey is a modern invention too, because before World War I, Turkey was the Ottoman Empire. It was a big swath of territory that was governed by the Turks in Istanbul. All right, but even before the Ottoman Empire, you go back to before 1300 AD, it wasn't the Ottoman Empire, it was the Byzantine Empire. All right, so if you look on a map and you see Greece and you see, oh, that's Greece. That hasn't always been Greece. That one area has not always been Greece. And Greece, throughout most of ancient history, was not relegated to just this one area. In fact, if you want to talk about the culture of the Greeks, you really are talking about an area more like this. Alright?
That's your culture?
Yeah.
Okay.
Alright, so does anyone know why? I mean, why is this New Testament Greek? Why isn't it New Testament Hebrew? Why isn't it New Testament Aramaic? Does anyone know? Like why did the apostles who were Jews and who spoke Aramaic as their first language, why did they write this in Greek? Why didn't they write it in Latin? It was the Roman Empire. Why didn't they write it in Hebrew? Think back to history in grade school. You remember a guy named Alexander? What's his, and we're done with that book now. Alexander who?
The Great.
Alexander the Great, yeah. Alexander the Great is the reason this is New Testament Greek and not New Testament or New Testament Aramaic. Because around around 330 BC, Alexander had conquered most of the known world. He started when he was about 22, and by the time he was about 32, he had conquered about every territory east of modern Greece. Just went through and destroyed the Persian Empire. And so even when the Romans came in and established, I think it was more recent than that. Even when the Romans came in about 100 BC and conquered Israel and then established the Roman Empire, it had been the Hellenic Empire for 200 years before that. And Jews, even devout Jews, and other peoples, Arabs, the Syrophoenicians, all the peoples of the Middle East, they were speaking Greek. They were speaking Greek because they had been conquered by a guy who loved Greek culture and who made people learn the Greek language and who built Greek temples. And, he was probably did a lot of persecuting of the Jews, I'm sure, and probably built some pagan temples inside of Jerusalem. But the fact that they all spoke Greek by the time Jesus was around, they all knew Greek, at least as their second language, maybe their third language, is because of his conquest. All right. So you go back to that map, and you have to think about Greece not as this place with well-defined lines that you could find on GPS. You got to think about a time period back in 1000 BC when you didn't have a good map of the world, and you thought about yourself as an Athenian or as a Spartan. You thought about yourself as an inhabitant of this city. And you had a kinship with the people in the next city and the people in the next city because they all spoke the same language and they worshiped the same gods. And you didn't have a kinship with people in Egypt or in Syria because they spoke different languages and had different gods. All right, but Greece was a lot bigger than it is nowadays. All right, the culture of Greece went with the Greeks when they went out and colonized all these different places throughout the Mediterranean. Because if you went out to this uncharted land, again, we don't have the lines drawn yet. France isn't France yet. Italy isn't Italy yet. Turkey isn't Turkey yet. The Turks are still hanging around in the mountains somewhere, probably knocking some rocks together. Maybe haven't even invented the wheel yet. I don't know what the Turks were doing. But Greek culture went with the Greeks. All right, and if they established a new city, then that was now Greece. All right, they didn't have a president like we have a president. They didn't have a senate the same way we had a senate. They didn't have a government that governed all this stuff, but culturally they identified themselves as Greeks. All right, so think about Greece in bigger terms than just that one little country. All right, so this is not as far as I wanted to get by now. Anybody need a 5-minute break? Because we're about to go into the alphabet.
Yeah.
You good?
We good? Okay. Need me to turn the air on?
That would help.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's warm or close.
Yeah.
So stop trying to should got that cough.
That's what I started saying. So it's probably interested if I know anything about Greek.
Yeah, and these little boots, why we had these bad. Maybe they will in a minute.
Yeah.
How can you tell what you looking at?
We got some air for you. Okay, so Greek's useful to know because it can help you have a deeper understanding of what exactly the word God said in the original language it was written in. The language was Greek and not Aramaic or Hebrew because Greek was the language of that half of the world at the time. Even though it was governed by Rome and the Romans spoke Latin, their control over the Middle East, over what was Israel, was more of a political control than a cultural control. They didn't really care too much that, the Jew wanted to speak Hebrew and worship his own God, as long as he paid taxes to Caesar. There were persecutions that came in the early church because Christians and Jews didn't want to acknowledge Caesar as a god. But in terms of actually, making everybody speak Latin and making everybody worship Jupiter, the Romans weren't really doing that. All right, and so the language of the East remained Greek for hundreds and hundreds of years, up until the Turks came in around 1380 in the Middle Ages. So, that being said, we have to actually start learning some Greek. And we're going to start with the alphabet. Everyone's been studying the alphabet, right? Okay. And hopefully as you've been studying it, you haven't found it too different than our own. There's some similarities there. You notice some of the similarities there. Okay. So, I'll wait. She just went to the restroom, I guess?
I think so.
Okay, I'll wait for her because I want us to all be on the same page. Already missing half the class anyway. Anybody got any questions right now?
I don't think so. Not yet, but I'm
Okay.
sure they're coming.
And so remember the time frame we're talking about, right? Jesus, born around 0 BC. The exact date of his birth, most people agree that we don't know the exact date of his birth, but traditionally we say 0 BC or 0 AD. This was when Rome was ruling the world, but the Greek culture had been a pervasive cultural force in the Mediterranean for over 1,000 years before that. And this isn't a Greek culture class, so we're not going to go too much into that, but the presence of the Greeks southern Italy was called Greater Greece for the longest time because they established colonies there, and they established temples there, and they built trading ports there. And, in Sicily and in southern France, if you go to France and visit Marseille, on the southern coast of France.
You been there?
No, I haven't been there. But it was originally Massilia, which was a Greek settlement. So they went and they took their culture and they took their, private property and their boundary lines with them to all those places. So Greece was throughout the Mediterranean. You ready for the alphabet, Kiwi?
Yes, sir.
All
I'm
right.
sorry.
No. Okay. So, the Greek alphabet is related to our own alphabet. Anyone know what our alphabet is called?
Our alphabet?
Yeah.
Alphabet.
Interesting. What are the first two letters of the Greek alphabet?
Greek?
Yeah.
Oh,
What are the first two letters? What is this letter called? Alpha.
you know that?
What's the next one?
Is it bacon?
Beta.
Beta. I know that one.
All right, so check it out. We call them alphabet because the Greek alphabet started with alpha and beta.
Wow.
All right, our alphabet is the Latin alphabet. We borrowed it from the Romans. And the Romans developed their alphabet. Hey, Mel. Good having you. I'm sorry you had to take your daughter to the hospital.
No, she had fell in her head. Big old my baby.
She okay?
Yeah, she.
Good. They can take a while.
Yeah, her first fall. Maybe she'll slow down now.
I
What
mean,
was she running?
She ran where she go.
Oh.
how old is she?
She be too low.
You really think so? Okay. Yeah, they spring back pretty fast, those kids. Okay,
So you said that the English alphabet is Latin alphabet.
the English alphabet is the Latin alphabet. There's a couple letters we have that we introduced into English because the Latin didn't use a K, so we borrowed that from Greek. But our alphabet, the reason why when you learn French, they use the same alphabet that we use, and the reason why when you learn Spanish, they use the same alphabet we use, is because all of those alphabets came from Latin. The Romans had a good thing going, and we just borrowed it and made it work for our language, changed the sounds of a few words, and made it work. But the Latin alphabet, the Greek alphabet, and the Hebrew alphabet all go back to the Phoenicians. So you go back to this map, and I said around, let's see, can I do that? What's that now? I said around 1600 BC, the Greeks were coming into the Mediterranean, and they started establishing these cities throughout the Mediterranean. Well, before the Greeks, the Phoenicians were doing the same thing. The Phoenicians were settling their own little cities throughout the Mediterranean. And, one city here might be a Greek city, and then 20 miles away you might have a Phoenician city, and maybe every few weeks they fight each other, or maybe every few weeks you go out and you trade with each other. But the Phoenicians were great traders. They were great sailors and they were great traders. And because they were so into commerce, it helps to be able to communicate in writing, so they developed a writing system, which was the prototype alphabet. And everyone since then has pretty much been taking that alphabet and changing it a little bit. The Hebrew alphabet was changed from the Phoenician alphabet, and the Greek alphabet was changed from the Phoenician alphabet, and made to work with the languages that they needed them to work with. All right, so we're going to go through the alphabet. There's 24 letters.
I know what y'all talking about.
We are talking about how Greece was a culture that went beyond the boundaries of just modern Greece. So you look on a map and you find modern Greece, and it's sitting right next to modern Turkey, and it's just to the east of modern Italy. Well, back in the day, from 1600 BC to Jesus' time, the Greek civilization was throughout the Mediterranean because they had established cities in all kinds of different places. And so now we're talking about how the culture that went with them, the Greek language, was the lingua franca, the language of commerce and city life and civilian life throughout the Eastern Roman Empire. So, and now we're doing an alphabet. So we're going to go through and we're going to do each sound. We're going to practice the sounds. Then we're going to take a real break, and we're going to come back and we're going to try reading some Greek together. All right. So first letter of the Greek alphabet is alpha. Repeat after me. Alpha.
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 Alpha. There's no F sound in Greek. Well, we're going to come back to that, but for now, we're going to go through and we're going to pronounce each of these letters the way a Greek would have pronounced them. Alpha. And it makes an ah sound. Ah. Ah. Everybody, we're going to be reading. We're going to be reading and repeating a lot together. And some funny words that sound weird. So, ah. All right. And I'm going to recommend to you, if you got a notebook, you might want to open it up so that you got both pages facing you. And then on one side you can practice writing these, and on the other side you can make a neat list. You know what I mean? Because I'm going to go through and you can just do this number. All right, just follow along with me. Ah. All right. So on one page you can just do your scribbling,
Okay.
and on the other page you can make a nice neat list. All right. So alpha. Ah. And you need to be able to write it. That looks good. I'm talking about. I don't know if yours looks good.
Fish over here.
Yeah, it looks like a little Jesus fish. It's on the line like that. Ah. Okay. The next sound, beta, all right, is not in our language. You put your lips together and just sort of beta.
Say it again.
Beta.
Beta.
Almost like a V, but not quite like a V. Beta. Beta. All right, and we're going to start below the line, and we're just going to do that number right there. Okay? It's got a little tail. It's like a V with a little tail. But it's not in our language. It's like a bumblebee kind of sound. Beta. So ah.
You gonna be going home playing with a baby?
Hey, y'all laughing, but we're the barbarians. We're the barbarians because, because Greeks came up with that word. Anyone who doesn't speak Greek is a barbarian. All right, so Rama.
You saying that was a G like?
Like. It's more of it's a thrill in the back of your throat. Rama. All right. And you write comma.
Now these lowercase like that?
These are lowercase. We're not focusing too much on the capital letters. That's why I gave you the bookmark so you didn't have to memorize the capital letters, but you can use it as a reference. All right. So Rama, if you start on the line, it's got a tail. It goes down. Rama. And I'm starring these because those are not sounds in our languages. Again, words between languages are not one-to-one. Sounds are not one-to-one.
Do that again. I don't see how you start that.
All right, that's just the line. That's just the line on the page.
Oh, so you're going that way.
Yep. As long as I can recognize it.
Is that it?
Yeah, that looks good. Gamma.
God.
All right, what's the next one, Carla?
Let me see what's going on. I think I found it.
What'd you say, recorder?
All top.
Good man. Delta. That sounds as All right. Delta,
Where's the S,
and that's just a duh. Just delta. Yeah, that sounds
Delta.
Yeah, it just has a spell, Delta.
Yeah, delta. Delta.
And how would it be on the line?
On the line. That's a good question. That's what I was just thinking. I was just thinking.
You on the line.
Like on your sheet.
On the sheet.
All right, actually, right. If you're actually writing it on your sheet, how would it?
You gotta put it on the line?
Just like
Or
this.
it's just, now that one's on the line.
That was-
Yeah, that one's on the line.
Well, I just go back to Gamma and back. Gracious.
Okay.
Okay. So I, and then duh. All right, the next one's pretty friendly too. It's epsilon. Yeah, and honestly, you have it. If you can't read it on the page, if you really want me to spell them out, I can spell them all out. But I'm not going to ask you to spell out any in Latin in our alphabet. I'm not going to ask you to spell them out. You're going to learn this well enough to be able to write a Greek letter down. So epsilon, and on the line, it's like this.
The Bible's 3.
Hmm?
The Bible's 3.
Yeah.
On cursive B.
Yeah.
Cursive.
Eh. So that's just an eh sound.
Well, remember that on the line,
Epsilon. Epsilon. All right, and I'm gonna start right here. Next one,
Zeta.
Zeta. Good man, Zeta. On the line, it's like that.
Okay.
Zeta. That's just the z, just z, just like our Z. Zeta. And you'll see different, remember, we're talking about a language, I said Greek is not Greek is not Greek. If you want to talk about the Greeks living in 1600 BC, their Mycenaean Greek is not the same as the Greek in Athens, during the 500 BC era. And the Greek in Athens, which was called Attic Greek, was a different dialect than the Greek in Sparta at the same time period, because it's not as if...
Because of the time changes or whatever.
Well, time changes and also space. Like, we can go visit our relatives in California, but, back in the day, you didn't go to Sparta on the weekend. So these people had cities that were tens or hundreds of miles apart, and they developed their own different dialects. So you'll see this sometimes drawn like this. In your book, I believe it has this little curly Q up here. You'll just see different little changes here and there. Okay. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta. Eta.
Is that a fraternity? Is this a fraternity? That's Zeta.
That's where all the sorority names come from.
So every one of these is a sorority.
Well, they have different combinations. I think the names come from like these Greek mottos that they have, and they keep them secret and don't tell anyone what the motto is. And like it's like normally a 3-word motto, and the first letter of each of those words is the name of their fraternity or sorority. Now, pay close attention, because this is and this is a. A. Like day, or hay, or a, or eta. If it's on the line, it's got that little tail right there. Zeta, eta, theta. Y'all repeat this one with me. Theta.
Theta.
Theta. The sound is not in our language. There are 2 T sounds in Greek.
Is that a Theta?
Yes, it is.
Theta.
Theta.
Like I put Theta.
Yeah, theta.
Take that.
Definitely gotta have that puff of air behind it. Ta.
It's on the line, ain't the line.
It's almost like if you draw a line in your zeros when you're at a zero, it's almost like that, except it's a circle. Well, hang on, it's backwards. Theta.
So if that doesn't join together, it's okay.
Oh yeah, that's fine. So it's, again, on the line, it's just like this, theta. Okay, so
Ah.
ah,
Mm.
duh,
Oh, we ain't saying no word.
no, we just sang it out.
Okay, let's do it again.
Ah,
Ooh.
Yeah.
duh, not gag. There you go. Duh,
Duh.
z,
Z.
a,
Tessa.
iota,
Whippy, iota.
iota,
What'd you say?
iota.
Iota.
Just a little hook.